Let's get to our next topic, default parameters. So when it comes to functions with a lot of parameters, it is surely helpful to use keyword arguments. But the caller of the function still has to do a lot of work. Can I make the caller's life easy? Okay, easier than what's right now? That's where you get default parameters. So what happens? In the definition of the function, we can specify the parameter in the form of a parameter and value. Remember, there is a keyword and value. Here it's parameter name and value. And when that is done, the value defined in that particular definition signature becomes the default value of the parameter, right? Let me show you this with an example. So I will go back to our great example of cinema scene. So I have this code which works fine, but what I'm going to do is something else. Okay, here I'm going to start giving default arguments. This is the parameter name, and I'm going to start providing some default values as of the form of parameter name equal to value. So that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, now I have defined the function. Let us just call it, and you will see how this works now. I am going to pass no arguments, right? She fought with him in the night at the hill to save him. Now, that's cool, right? I mean, I have not even passed one parameter, and it seems to be, I mean, I know there are some quirks in it. It says him and him, but it is still much more readable, and I have not even passed one parameter here. So that is why these kind of default parameters are called optional parameters. Because there is a default value, you can get away without passing them. So they are optional. So because I didn't pass anything, all of them got replaced by the default values. Now, optional means it's obviously it's not mandatory, but you can also say, can I pass something? Of course, it's optional. So if you want, you can pass parameters if you want. Now, before we continue, I just wanted to address this. Now, you could ask me, why should I make the caller's life easier, right? So I am defining the function. Why should I make the caller's life easier? Because now, as the person who defines the function, you obviously have to do more work, right? You have to define those default parameters to all of them. The thing is, most times you will be the one who's calling this function from other parts of the code, right? So you will, that's what the greatness of function-based modularity, right? So you can define the function, you can call it again and again. Most times you are the one who's going to call it, right? And you will be the one who's benefiting from those cases, right? That is the beauty of a defined function. So you have to do this work once, but then it becomes easy for you or anybody else to call it, which is a great thing, right? Now, this is why default parameters are so cool. Now let us come back. And as I said, default parameters does not mean that you don't pass anything. I mean, either you pass everything or pass something. You can choose, right? You can choose send some of them and not send others. And this is where the keyword arguments help. So if you saw this, the him in the case of the default values for hero and villain are him, right? So it's not very clear. So let us say I am going to give a name to the hero and heroine so that it reads better, right? So I can do this, hero. So this says Rani fought with him in the night at the hill to save Ravi. That's much better, right? That reads a little much better than what we had initially. So using keyword arguments combined with default parameters, I am able to get enough change in the behavior of the function as I need, right? So I'm using those arguments, those default parameters to fill up wherever I want the default, and wherever I want a slight change, I am passing those parameters. So this is obviously a very dummy simple example, but I think it clearly illustrates what you can do. So you can pick and choose as the caller what I want to change and allow defaults to be used. So as a function definer, I can give sensible defaults to these values and then make life easy for the caller, right? Now you might think that, oh, this is possible only with default parameters can be used only with keyword arguments. No, it works perfectly with positional arguments too. So instead of doing like this, so I'm just taking away the keywords and just passing it positionally. What happens now? Obviously, it doesn't work exactly like before because the way the parameters are positioned are different. You can see she fought with Rani in the night at the hill to save Ravi. So Ravi is corresponding to the hero and Rani has become corresponding to the villain, because if you remember, villain is the second parameter right here. So positionally that's what comes, and the heroine is still she, which is fine. This also reads fine, but you can see that the default parameters work with both positional arguments as well as keyword arguments, right? But my preference, obviously, with such long list of parameters, is use keyword arguments. So obviously, if I want to do this, I want to say, let's say I want to correct this. So what I can do is I can mix them up, like I said before. So here I'm passing the two parameters like as per position, hero and villain, and then heroine is the end. So I want to use the default values for location and time, and then use keyword arguments to fill in the heroine's name. So now Rani fought with Raja in the night at the hill to save Ravi. So here I have used a combination of positional arguments and keyword arguments along with default parameters. You can do the same, right? So play with this, play with the definition, play with how you call parameters, and you can learn more. So there are two things to note about default parameters. So you don't have to provide a default value for all parameters. When I define them, I don't have to provide default value for all of them. For some of them, you might provide default. Others, you might choose to make it mandatory to pass, right? So let us, if you look at this definition, maybe I can, I change the order. So let's say I want location and time to be so let us say I want to keep location and time to be default, some default values there, but others I want the user caller to provide them value, right? So if I take this, that's done. Now if I call, I have to this of course works. Now if I take out this, remember the new definition now, the new definition, this is the new definition, only default parameters are provided for location and time, right? So when I do this, it won't work, right? So hero, heroine, villain do not have defined default parameters. So if you don't pass one of them, Python will give you an error. So in the case of when you use optional arguments and some mandatory arguments, you mix them up, you should have all the optional arguments at the end, just like I have done. Right? This is mandated by Python because then only things are clear, explicit, right, and straightforward. So when you mix and match, it is easy for Python or more clear on what you want the caller to do or what you want Python to do. Python always will want to make things explicit and clear. It doesn't want ambiguity because it leads to more bugs, more issues, right? So that's the first thing to remember. So you need not make all of them default. You can choose some of them to be default or non-mandatory and others to be mandatory, and all mandatory params come in front and optional params come at the end. The second thing to remember is that when you use default values for any of the parameters, ensure that these are of type which are immutable in nature. I think we have covered immutable before. So you can use default parameters or default parameter values for of any parameters which have the type string, integer, etc. So, but if the parameter is of type say list, set, then don't use default values. This will cause unexpected results. I won't go into the details because it can be a bit more complex and it will take us away from the main things we are trying to learn, right? You can try it if you want to find more, but the bottom line is whenever you are using default parameters, use it for those parameters of type which are immutable like string, integer. If you have these parameters of type list, set, etc., don't use default parameters. It actually causes some unexpected behavior. That's it. That's all we want to do with default parameters. So I think we have covered a lot of ground in parameter definition and calling these arguments. Next, we will look at something else. See you in the next one.